Welcome, everyone, to Office 365 Dev Pulse. I'm your host, Scot Hillier, Office 365 MVP, and also the community lead for the developer community on IT Unity. As I just revealed, we're on a new platform this week, so we're just turned over to GoToWebinar. So if we're having any troubles at all, if things aren't working out right, please let us know by sending in a question or chat to us, so that we can make it right. Before we dig into anything else, I want to make sure, as I always do when we start off, that I give a big thank you out to Microsoft, who's our sponsor for this show. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do all the wonderful things that we're doing. So thank you very much, Microsoft. Today we have as our guest Rich diZerega. Rich, maybe you could share your webcam and join us. Rich is a software development engineer in the Technical Evangelism and Development Group at Microsoft. He's responsible for helping developers and software companies use services, Microsoft services, and in particular Office 365 and Azure services. I've known him for a while, and he's really passionate about all the different kinds of technologies. In fact, he's a real consumer of technology. If there's something new that comes out, Rich is sure to have his arms around it. He also is a guest on lots of these shows, so not only doing my show here, but you'll find him on the Office 365 Developer Podcast quite a bit. Looks like he's trying to join us. Maybe the wrong camera on there. Get there. And the Office Dev Show on Channel 9. He has lots of community contributions as well, so you can find things on his MSDN blog, up on GitHub, out in conferences that you go to, lots and lots of things done by Rich, very big footprint inside the community. So we'll have some links for you at the end for the folks that are watching to all the wonderful things like his blog and his Channel 9 presentations. But what we're here to talk about is we're going to talk with Rich a little bit about the unified APIs, the Office 365 unified APIs. So Rich, are you there? Can we...
I'm here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to be seen for the moment. It's kind of coming up weird and green, but I'm definitely here, and thanks for having me as a guest.
Great, great. Well, happy to have you here, Rich. Hey, tell us a little something about yourself that isn't in your bio.
Oh, that isn't in my bio. Well, I would say that I'm a developer at heart. It doesn't necessarily have to be Office 365. I love doing development across anything. I guess a weird fact about me, I was a nationally ranked gymnast growing up before I got into the geeky things, so love still seeing cool things on TV like Ninja Warrior and stuff like that, right up my alley.
Are we going to see you on Ninja Warrior anytime soon?
I don't know. I'm probably not exciting enough. Probably out of shape too, so.
Well, you know, we watch Ninja Warrior around here, and they're going into the finals now. If you're following it, you know that.
Yep.
And they have them in Vegas, so I'm wondering if my next conference is going to kind of overlap because I'll be in Vegas in the next couple of weeks. So we're trying to see if maybe we could catch some of that and actually do it in person. But we've been watching that since it was on the Japanese show. You see the Japanese version, I assume.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been around for a while. Well, great. Happy to have you here. So, Rich, so today we're going to talk a little bit about the unified APIs. So give us an intro, you know, tell us what are the unified APIs and why are we supposed to care about them?
Yeah, so, you know, if you've done development with Microsoft in the past with our APIs, especially if you look at Office 365, you know, there's so many different services that make up Office 365. You have services that live in Exchange, you have services that live in SharePoint, you have services like OneNote. All these different services were kind of very, very disparate in the past. So I'd have to go to different places to work with different objects. So whether that be getting users or getting files or getting contacts or calendar, all those things came from different places. And so each one of them also, the APIs were all slightly different. And so developers that maybe were building applications that had to go multiple places, they were challenged in a lot of ways to do that. They found themselves having to, in a lot of ways, re-authenticate to go call a different service. They found that Maybe the format that data came back was different when they went to another service. And so even beyond that, there was a lot of challenges around what we would call discovery. So for users that are using things like OneDrive for Business, every single user in the world has their own unique URI for OneDrive for Business. And so figuring out where to go and look for their files, that took an entire effort of its own that we call discovery. And so
right.
the unified API is really geared at solving a lot of those challenges.
Right. Yeah, I wrote some of that code myself, and you're right. It was a bit of a challenge to get that done. So now, with the unified APIs, though, what products are we talking about that are covered by it?
So today we have some of the primary workloads of Office 365. So things like files, we have calendar information, my mail, user information, and then we start getting into some unique areas. So things like the new Office 365 groups. Those groups in themselves span multiple services. You have usually an Exchange mailbox, a calendar, a SharePoint site collection that kind of is associated with those. So those are all accessible through that unified API. Over time, our vision is that almost anything will fall underneath there. So things like OneNote notebooks, or maybe even things like Skype for Business might one day fall underneath that unified API.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I personally find really exciting, is the idea that every single Microsoft product that I'm using in the business world is going to be accessible in a very standard way, and that I can use pieces of all those products in the custom applications that I create. So, maybe someday built into my application I have Skype and we're working on a document together. All those things can be done in a custom place, which makes it pretty exciting.
Yeah, you said a key word there that I think is really interesting. You said in the business world. You said the services that I'm using in a business world. And that's definitely true for the unified API today. The interesting thing is we have a vision for that unified API to span both consumer and commercial. So today it's really just commercial. It's the Office 365 type of APIs. But in the future, we want that to be also things like Outlook.com or Skype Consumer or OneDrive, the normal consumer OneDrive services. And so this is something that I think we're looking to make a reality very soon. But think of this as in the future as an API, as a developer using these APIs, I can just send my users to a login screen, and whatever account they provide, whether that's an organizational account or a consumer account like a live.com or an outlook.com account,
right,
based upon what account they use, that unified API will automatically point to the right place. So if I want to get messages out of their inbox, we can automatically direct them to the right place in the future.
Yeah, that's great. So I can be getting messages out of the inbox and chatting with my Xbox friends at the same time.
That's right, absolutely, with the same APIs.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, listen, so what are we going to do first? Are we going to take a look at the structure of some of these APIs and see how they're laid out?
Yeah, so I can definitely give you a glimpse at kind of some of the three main things I'd like to highlight maybe in this first demonstration are, first of all, the discovery piece is today, if I wanted to go to get someone's files off OneDrive for Business, if you ever worked with those APIs, it's under SharePoint, and you'd have to go to their OneDrive for Business or their My Site, and then it would be _API /files. And every single user has their own unique endpoint to go and get files with an API. And so the first thing I want to illustrate is the beauty of discovery. We're going to make it so easy for you to go find a user's files. And then the other thing that we'll demonstrate here is we're doing some amazing things around what I would call traversal of objects in Office 365. And that may not make a lot of sense at first, but when you see a little bit of the demonstration, I think it'll make more sense.
Okay, sounds great.
So let me share my desktop, and I might need to be promoted so that I can do that.
And I'm hopeful that your desktop won't be green.
Hope not. You let me know.
Oh, that looks good.
Looks good. All right. So I'm going to go to a place that anyone can play in. Let me minimize some of the stuff here. If you go to graphexplore2.azurewebsites.net, and I'll zoom in on this. Hopefully Zoom in will work well. But if you look at graphexplore2.azurewebsites.net, if you sign into this, this is it's a tool to be able to go and play with the Unified API. So the first thing I'll point out here is that the Unified API falls off a unified domain. If you look at this here, everything is going to be off of graph.microsoft.com. Whether I'm going to Exchange services, SharePoint services, Azure Active Directory, OneNote, you name it, it's all going to fall off that. And so let's just play with a few interesting things that I can do on this endpoint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, give me all the information about me. So I'm just going to go to me, and now this isn't giving me a really pretty response. It's just giving me raw JSON data. But if you look through here, I'll ask you this, Scott. You've worked in the Microsoft developer space for a long time.
Sure.
Where are all the places that user profile information might live?
Everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. You have
everywhere.
User profile information. Probably the most of it is in Azure Active Directory.
Yep.
You have information in SharePoint, like maybe my skills, my Ask Me About.
Sure.
But even nowadays, you have profile information in things like Exchange. So Exchange might have my high-resolution picture.
Yep.
Well, what you're looking at here when I say /me, this is bringing all that data together in one result response. So if I look through here, there's all kinds of information, and I can look at any specific thing. So maybe if I wanted to say, show me my manager, I can do a get here, and that brings back my manager. So I can go here and find, hopefully somewhere it'll have the display name. There it is, Laura Rubelke is my manager. Or my direct reports. So I'll say direct reports. And we'll see that that's a big empty array because I'm not important enough to have direct reports at Microsoft.
That's because you're doing the real work.
I guess so. But so those are some of the Active Directory things. But if I were to do something different here, like let's look at maybe user photo. I do a get on this. What we'll see is this is going to bring me back, in this case, a high-resolution picture for 648 pixels by 648 pixels. So we've gone from a core user profile property to something a little bit more advanced.
Now, just a couple of things to be clear here. So first of all, you've logged into this tool, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I did that ahead of time. If you look up to the corner, it knows who I am, and I can sign out here. But yeah, I logged in ahead of time. And I also gave this is actually considered an application of its own. That might be a little bit confusing, but the first time you use this, it's going to say, hey, will you give this Graph Explorer, this API Explorer, access to your data? And it'll give you a long list of things that it wants access to.
Right, so you can see in the URL that you've provided us that this is running as an Azure solution. It's up in Azure websites.
That's right.
That's an important thing for people to understand is that this only happens with the consent of the people whose information is being accessed. You can't go up there and access any information you want. You need to have the privileges to do it.
That's right. And we'll I think in our second demonstration we'll look at that authentication piece because that really is our APIs we've made them. I'll throw out a word. I use the word Disney simple sometimes. You know, Disney makes things really easy. I think these APIs we've made them just so easy that a lot of times authentication is the hardest part. We'll look at that part for sure.
Sure. Yeah. The plumbing is easy to get hung up in. That's for sure.
So this has been user profile stuff, but here's where it gets interesting. If I wanted to go to, let's look at messages. And so now I'm actually going to go and look at my actual inbox. This might be a little bit dangerous. And looks like my session timed out, so let me sign in here again. There we go. And so let's look at my messages. And so this is going to bring back my actual messages from my inbox. And so you can actually see the body here. It has, in this case, it's kind of a rich text format. And there's a lot of things that are going on. But what I'll do is let me go back one, and let's actually add an interesting filter here, because all of these support all the popular OData filters. So if I wanted to do something like, let's search my inbox for everything with Hillier. So I'm going to just put your last name here, and we'll go ahead and do a get. And so now it's going to go bring back all the messages where it finds that keyword. And so you can see there's a couple things here. It looks like this is where I accepted the invite for this webcast today.
Right.
So that's messages, but I can start doing other things. Let's go to maybe events, and I'll go out here and do a quick query of events. So this is going to bring back my calendar, and I can go get all the things on my calendar. And I'm doing mostly gets here, but I can also do all the other operations. Like I can do posts to create new calendar invites or patches and things like that.
Right. So you said this is an OData compliant endpoint, right? So you could do all the sorts and filters as well as asking for just the fields you want. You wouldn't have to get everything back.
That's right. I can do selects. I can do takes and skips and all those things to support paging. Yeah, it is very compliant around all the popular OData type of parameters that I might want to use.
Yeah, it sort of feels like a better version of Fiddler, but targeted just at this endpoint.
Yeah, it's a really good way of thinking about it. Yeah, it is very specific to the unified API, but it certainly lets you look at all the raw information, including the header information if I wanted to. So yeah, very good analogy. So I'm going to jump over to files now, and I'm going to illustrate a little bit around the power of what I call traversal. So let me do a get here on files. And we can see this is my OneDrive for Business data, and I can go through here, and I'm going to look at this is my actual OneDrive for Business at Microsoft. No smoke and mirrors here. This is the real thing. And I'm going to look for this file called Cloud Overview PPTX. So I'm just going to do a Control F, and we'll look for Cloud Overview PPTX. So what I'm going to do is go to the actual file itself. So you can see it actually has, this tool has really nice little navigation links so I can go deeper into the structure. But here's where traversal gets amazing. I'm on a file right now, but let me kind of mix this up. Let me go from the file and let me find maybe the modified user of it. So I'm going to say / modified by user. And what it brings me back, and I must have done that wrong. Let's see, modified. Try it one more time.
You still have to type correctly.
You do. Let's see. That is right. Resource segment. Let me try this. Maybe this actually might be down right now. So I'm going to do a quick switch to an alpha endpoint. And it still doesn't like that. Interesting. So what I was trying to show here is that we can actually go from a file and go over to a full user. Because when I think most people in SharePoint are familiar with like the modified by, last modified by user. The idea here, though, is it's not just going to bring me back their username. It's going to bring me back a full object, a full user object, and I can keep going further off that. So I could say last modified by user / files, and I could actually get that user's files or get that user's manager.
Right.
So it's really, really advanced, the things that I can do.
Well, what you're showing there really goes to graph theory, right? The graph theory is the objects and the edges that connect those objects. So if you have any object in the graph, you can get to any other object in the graph by moving through the edges, through those relationships.
That's right. So and actually, I'm going to show you. I was able to get it to it here. So let me actually do manager off of created by user, which is really just me. So it's a little bit odd, but I'll show you something really cool we're doing in the graph. So let me see if this works here. Created by user, and then get their manager. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a really interesting parameter to the end called what if. So I'm just going to say what if on the end of this. This is actually not even documented yet. We'll document it at some point. But what this is going to do, if you've ever worked with SQL Server, you can run query plans. What this is actually doing here, it's doing a query plan on our REST query that we did. So this is pretty neat. So when we said what if, what we did is we went to a file and then we went to the created by user and looked up their manager. And if you look at the response here, it shows me the exact query plan for this. It says first, I'm going to go to SharePoint file services and I'm going to get a file. And then for whatever comes back there, I'm going to run a second request to get the manager of the last modified by user. And so this kind of illustrates that graph. It shows you kind of what's happening behind the scenes when we pass one of these complex queries back to the graph.
Yeah, that is pretty neat right there. Now, is there a way at this point to take advantage of that knowledge to make your queries more efficient?
So it actually is. The interesting thing is as you go through this, along the way, it actually has navigators. So if I were to just say, get me the created by user and say get, you can see here it actually has a link to that user. And so it's actually a little bit more efficient to go and grab these links and then go and kind of move forward with your own type of query, because it's still going to be running multiple queries behind the scenes, and this will end up being a little bit more efficient if you use the navigator links that we provide in the JSON response.
I would maybe save you from writing a few promise code maneuvers in there if you did it all at once, right? They take care of that on the server for you.
That's right. Yep. So a few other things, I'll just kind of close out a few things on this, and one of them is I mentioned groups. So I'm going to go back to me, and I'm going to say joined groups. So this is going to show me all of the Office 365 groups I'm a member of. And so it's going to go find those. You can see I'm a member of 4 or 5, actually it looks like about 8 different groups. This first one is, I'll just pick on it, a huge navigation link so I can go directly to the group. And then from the group, I might want to traverse this further. So this is an Office 365 group, one of the new unified groups. So I can do things like show me the members of the group. And so this will bring back all the members. Or show me the conversations. So I can go look at the conversations that are going on, the nice social thread around these groups. Or even do things like show me the files for this Office 365 group. So really rich capability to go into some of those new unified groups. And then the last thing here that I would show you about me is we're also integrating into the Office graph, so the thing that powers Delve. So I can do a few interesting things here, like say working with, and I can say for me, who do I work with? And this is going to actually ignore organizational structure completely. This is purely looking at who I interact with, who am I collaborating with inside of Office 365. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people here that are actually on my team, but if I go to the bottom, there's people like Jeremy Thake. He's on a completely different organization than me, and Steve Walker, same deal. Those guys aren't in my org, but it's able to pull those in using that Office graph.
So it's working with the same machine learning technology that the Office graph uses.
Absolutely. In fact, if I go to trending around,
right.
Trending around is actually the default view you get in Delve. So if I were to go and compare this to Delve, this is exactly what, this is kind of the raw results of what Delve has.
Very nice. I like that a lot.
So, and I guess one last thing I'd point out here is that this isn't all about me. I'm not necessarily narcissistic as a developer, so I can jump over to other users. So instead of saying me, I'm going to say my organization. And I could do things like user / I'll pick on Jeremy. I'll say jthake at Microsoft.com. And I could go further here to say who is his manager. So we'll see who Jeremy's manager is, and it'll say Chris Johnson, but that's unfortunately not the case anymore. Or do things like show me Jeremy's files, and it'll show me all the files that Jeremy has shared with me. So we can traverse not only myself, but others within the organization. So really powerful things with the unified API.
And again, this is public information, information that you've been allowed to see. You're not going to be able to see any documents that aren't shared.
Absolutely, yeah, it's all trimmed. So, Jeremy might have some super secret file. If he hasn't shared that with me, it will not come back in these results.
Right. Yep. Well, that's great. That's great. Okay. Anything else we should see here?
I could play in here all day. I would just encourage, the listeners to go out and try this on their own with their own tenant. There's, a number of things you can do, especially, with the Office graph. I find that so interesting. So, I can do things like who Jeremy is working with and be able to go and do some of those interesting cross-organization views of what's going on in our environment. And so, go check this out for sure and start getting a feel for the different API calls you might make with the unified API.
Okay, so let's start to talk a little bit about developing with the unified APIs then. So if I like what I see here and I think, wow, I could use this in some solutions that I'm putting together, how do I get started? What programming skills do I need? Where are the resources? Where should I stop first?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost is to understand a little bit about how Office 365 works. And I should mention that, really everything that we're looking at here is really today exclusive to Office 365. We're definitely looking at hybrid scenarios to enable these APIs and what that might look like for someone that has some of these services on premises. We're looking very, very seriously at how we can enable that. But today it's Office 365, and it's important to realize what the identity for Office 365 is, which is Azure Active Directory. Now, when I tell some developers that, they get confused and they say, well, when I sign into Office 365, I go to my own organization sign-in page, so it has to be our Active Directory. Well, really what's happening behind the scenes for every single Office 365 customer, your identity lives in Azure Active Directory. There might be a synchronization that we do to put a copy of your on-premises user account in the cloud, but it's always the identity is Office 365, is Azure Active Directory. So when we work with these APIs, Azure Active Directory is really going to be the gateway to be able to get to all these APIs. So one interesting thing is most people are aware of that Active Directory stores things like users and groups. But Azure Active Directory is unique because it not only stores users and groups, but it also has a concept of applications. Right. And so really the first step of consuming these unified APIs, or really any API with Microsoft in Office 365, is defining an application.
Well, so now I want to put out here though that you need an organizational account even just to get going, right? So there might be some people watching us that don't even have Office 365, or a subscription to Azure, right? So I just like to tell everybody that they can go to dev.office.com and sign up for the Office 365 developer program, and then there they'll be able to do everything that they're doing because they can get an Office 365 developer tenancy.
That's right. In fact, I'll show you, we've recently updated the Getting Started experience with our Office 365 APIs. So this is the exact site that Scott was just referring to, dev.office.com, and across the top is a link called Getting Started. And so if you go to Getting Started, it really covers the 3 different areas of Office 365 extensibility, and that is using the Office 365 APIs, building Office add-ins, or building SharePoint add-ins. And so if we go to this Office 365 API area, what you'll find is it provides you kind of a walkthrough of how you might go about doing that. And so it talks about, hey, you might need to sign up for a free Office 365 developer account. So for those that are listening that don't have one of these, you can get a free Office 365 tenant. It includes everything. It includes Office, it includes SharePoint, Exchange, everything. you get a one-user tenant of that for a year by going out here. So definitely do that if you don't have one. So after you set that up, the next step is you need to start registering applications. And back when I first started doing this, you had to actually go to Azure. So you had to go out here to Azure. This is the Azure Management Portal. And there's an application tab for your directory where you could go create an application. Today, we're trying to make that a lot easier for you. You can simply go to this Getting Started page, and down at the bottom, you can select whatever you're wanting to build for. So let's say we wanted to build something for, let's say we wanted to build an iPhone application. And so I can click on iOS, and as soon as you sign in with that org account, and you're going to get an org account when you sign up for that free tenant, as soon as you sign in, it's going to allow you directly on this page now to register an application. So you can see here it says register an application. You can give it a name. You can give it what the redirect URI is. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. And then you can specify what services you want to connect into. And so this is pretty new. We've done this. This was just released in the last month, but it makes it a lot easier. You never really have to go to Azure anymore to register one of these applications.
Well, that's really nice, actually, because that means with just the Office 365 developer tenancy and this page, you can create the applications. It used to be that you'd have to go sign up for that Azure subscription.
That's right. Yeah, you had to give a credit card number and all this stuff. So
right.
Yeah, we've tried to make it. Yeah, that was probably our biggest feedback from developers was that our getting started experience was horrendous, and all I can tell you is I agree, and we listen to you, and we're making that better. In fact, this is going to get even better over the next few months.
Yeah, this is great, really good.
So the other thing is I will point out that Visual Studio has a good getting started experience as well. So I'm going to come out here. Let's create a new project, and I'll show you a little bit of the authentication piece for creating one of these applications. So I'm going to create one. We'll call this the O365 Dev Pulse app. I'm going to create a web application. And it really doesn't matter what I go with here. I'm just going to create an MVC app. It honestly doesn't matter a whole lot. But one of the great things that Visual Studio provides us is it actually has a little mechanism as you set up a web application to provide single sign-on to Azure Active Directory. And so there's a little link here that says change authentication. If you look at that here, I can go in here and I can actually configure this to use that Office 365 organization that I've set up when I created my developer tenant. So I'll come out here and I'll say I want to use a work and school account, and I'll just type in, mine is rzdemos.com. I actually went and put a real domain on mine because I got sick of typing in on Microsoft.com. So most of you, if you've set up a developer tenant, you're going to end up with some name that you come up with on your own, .onmicrosoft.com, and that's your tenant domain. I've just gotten sick of typing that in over and over and bought a real domain through GoDaddy for mine. So I'll go ahead and say, okay, it's going to ask me to authenticate here, because it's not going to let me register anything without being a real user. So I'll just say, give it a user account, sign in, and then it's going to go behind the scenes and basically set up all the scaffolding for this application. So it's actually going to do the same thing that Getting Started page was doing. It's going to register an application for us. Now, this application isn't actually going to have any permissions quite yet, but we'll do that here in just a moment. And actually, just to show you that this is real, let me actually go to Azure. This is my Azure Management Portal, and if I were to refresh this here, hopefully we'll find the application that we're in the process of provisioning. And there it is. So I'll zoom in here. You can see there's this Office 365 Dev Pulse application that we've defined. And so I will go in here for just a moment, and if I go to the Configure tab, this has all the details, a lot of it that you don't necessarily have to worry yourself with. So it has things like an application identifier, which uniquely identifies your application across everything in Active Directory. It has something called a key, which we'll look at here in a moment. It's a secret password for your application. But at the bottom, the really important thing is this section that says permissions to other applications. And this is what allows this application that we've defined really just for having single sign-on with Azure Active Directory. We're going to set it up so that it can call those unified APIs. And so I'm going to click on Add Application here. And you'll find a number of different things that are in this list. But what we're going to go with is the Office 365 Unified API. It is in a preview. I should say that I haven't mentioned that yet. Today this is in preview. And that's, if you noticed when I was doing all the different queries, my URL had beta in the URL.
I was going to say we saw alpha and beta.
Yeah, so that'll we'll be bringing this out of GA very soon. But for today, it is a beta thing. But this is really where we're investing heavily. This is where all the investment is going. And so certainly, if you have an application you need built in the next month, rely upon the old APIs. If you have something that's maybe by the end of the calendar year, I think that's something that'll align better with what we're doing with the availability of these unified APIs. So if you look through this, I'm going to have all kinds of permissions that span all of those different services in Office 365. So I'm going to have things like I can read the signed-in users' files, or maybe I want to read all the directory data or access the directory as the user. Or maybe I want to be able to read the users, read and write all the site collections that the user has access to. So I can define all the different permissions I want and then save this. And ultimately, I have now given my web application access to those things in the unified API. So let's actually wire this up here really quickly. The great thing is when we did that setup through the new project wizard, it actually set up all the authentication for us. So without getting into all the nuts and bolts of an MVC project here, there's a startup.auth. And if we look in this, this is what's going to force us through an entire sign-in process. And actually, may have done it. Just make sure this did this here. So that's what's going to actually go in here and actually set all that up is in this startup.auth. So what we can do is simply go directly to consuming services. So if I go to like my home controller here under index, and I'll zoom in and make this a little bit bigger and easier to see, I can immediately say that, well, first of all, this has to be authorized in order to call this endpoint. But I can immediately start calling those services against the unified API. And so we'll do a little bit of that here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up just a really simple utility that is going to allow us to do an HTTP GET. So this is just basically calling a normal REST call. And I'll just resolve some of these here using HTTP. And I think the rest of this should be good. I'll need to do one more include. And so if we just look at the detail here, this says get JSON. So it's going to basically, it's just a really small utility method that says, given an endpoint and a special token, and we'll talk about token here in a moment, go out and perform a GET. So the same thing that we were doing in that API Explorer, we're going to do here programmatically. Now, the key to making all of these calls is we need to provide something called an access token in all of our requests. So this is doing a normal GET against a REST endpoint, but we're going to have a special header here. So you can see here on my HTTP client, we're specifying what we call an authorization bearer token. So we're specifying an authorization header, and we're putting a token on every request. And that is really the key to getting data out of Office 365, is we want to put this token on every single request we make to the unified API.
Now,
and as long as we have that,
to point out here that authentication token scheme is really an internet standard. So this isn't some weirdo Microsoft made-up way to do things. This is the way the internet works. And so the unified APIs are using the same approach that everybody else is using.
That's right, absolutely. So this is, to get a little bit more specific, this is using what we call OAuth, or Open Authentication. And the token is something that we call, I might be getting a little bit geeky here, but it's called a JSON Web Token. A JOT token is kind of the short name for it. And what that is it's going to look like a bunch of gibberish, but it's really just base64 encoded JSON data. And it says things like, here's what the token has access to, here's the expiration of the token, because these tokens expire. But ultimately, that provides all the information that the unified API needs to say, yeah, this user is valid, and we're going to allow them access to information that is contained in Office 365. So the big question here...
That token comes to us, that's given to us by Azure Active Directory, right?
Bingo, there you go. So the big thing that's missing here is how in the world do we get that token, right? Making a REST call is pretty easy, but actually how do we get a token? So let's go back up here to our index, and what we need to do is, let's just act like we're going to make a call out to, and I'll just, I'm going to make this a task in itself, because we're going to do things asynchronously. But if we were to call get JSON, and we can pass it an endpoint. In this case, I'll say, let's go out to https graph.microsoft.com/beta/me, and we'll get files. We gave it permission to get files. But then the next thing is it needs that access token. So the way we can get an access token is by going out to Azure Active Directory. And it's actually a pretty easy process. It seems confusing, but the process is OAuth is really centered around letting the provider of data or the owner of data hold the keys to the kingdom. And so the first step is we're actually going to send the user off to Azure to sign in. But when we send them to sign into Azure, we're going to say once they're done and they've signed in, and they've granted us access to their data, because that's something that's going to happen here. It's going to stop and say, do you want to give this user access to your files? After all that occurs, where do you want us to send some information back? And so one of the things we'll end up doing is we'll specify, hey, here's the redirect URI, that once the user's done signing in, where do you want us to send, where does Azure want us to send back some contextual information? When we get that back, that's actually not the access token that gets sent back, because that would be, that gets passed through just the URL. So there's an additional step, is we take that information that Azure gives us in our application, and we perform an additional post to get an access token. And so this is something you can do manually. The great thing is that the Azure Active Directory team has built a huge set of libraries for almost every platform you can imagine that makes this really, really easy. So rather than manually doing that whole redirect and posting to get your token, you can use something called the Azure Active Directory Authentication Libraries, or we call them ADAL a lot of times because we love doing acronyms in the tech world. But ADAL makes this really easy. So I'll give you an example here. So I'm going to create an authentication context here. And an authentication context is exactly what we were just talking about. It's ADAL. And so I'll say auth context equals a new authentication context. And what this wants inside of it, our authentication context, is something called an authority. And so an authority is just saying, where am I going to sign in? And in the case of Office 365, we're going to go into login.microsoftonline.com. And then on top of that, we can pass things like what is the tenant, or we can use something called common. And that's probably getting a little bit confusing, but ultimately this is saying, by saying common, I'm saying that this can be used by any organization that uses Office 365.
Right, so you can make applications for your own organization, or you could make applications like a software vendor that could be used by lots of applications. That's
right. Yeah, you could. So I could have easily hard-coded this to my organization by coming in here and saying, mine is rzdemos.com. So I could have easily done that, but in this case, I just want to make it available for anyone to use it. This would be great for like a mobile application or a web application that you're going to make available to many different orgs. Once I have the authentication context, I can simply use it to go and get an access token. And actually, I may have used the wrong include here, so let me do something, fix this here. Actually, this may have pulled in the wrong library, but ultimately I can explain what would be going on here is that I could say auth context dot get access token for resource. And what the resource is, it's ultimately just telling me what service I actually want to connect into. So I'm going to actually I'll jump to one here that's actually a little bit more complete. We'll do the cooking show version here. But if I were to go back to this here, let's go to my controller, my user controller, and here's the completed code for this. So you can see I'm getting my authentication context. And ultimately, I'm saying use that context to get a token for a specific resource. And so if we look in here, the resource that I'm asking for is the unified API. So we're passing in this unified API, and what that's going to do is bring back a token specific to that unified API. So let's just put a quick breakpoint here.
So the key thing here is that there's a moderately complex plumbing process, what we sometimes call the OAuth dance, that goes on behind the scenes. But what we get is our classes that abstract that complexity away, making it easier for us to participate without having to get into the nitty-gritty.
That's right. So what you're seeing here is 4 lines of code to get an access token. And that's, yep. I mean, that's the key to the kingdom. Once you get that access token, I can go and call any of those services that you saw me calling in the API Explorer. So we'll put I'll put a breakpoint, we'll put one up here where I actually get the token, and then I'm going to go get user details. And so let me go ahead and press play here. Now my breakpoint shouldn't automatically hit, because what we're going to end up doing is we're first going to send the user to sign in. So it's going to launch up here, and what should happen, there you go, it pushed us out. Now I'm signed in under the wrong tenant, and so I need to use the right tenant, and I'm going to use that in, I might need to use another browser altogether. Let's do an in private.
So this is the special fun we developers have with this, which is we have multiple tenancies, and we get cookies stuck in the cache that have us logged into the wrong thing.
That's right. That's right. So let's see. I hope I'm using the right port number here.
Or in private mode helps clean that up.
It does. Yeah. So I joke around. I feel like we're, as developers with Office 365, sometimes we're a little bit schizophrenic because we have multiple personalities, and a lot of times I have like 3 different users I'm normally signing in and out as. So let me make sure I have the right URL. Yeah, so it is 44300. So let's do that one more time.
I've taken to including a pre-deployment script in my work so that it just clears the cache before it runs the project.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. So here we go. It should be kicking up. And so the first step is it's going to kick me out to sign in. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in with my account here. And this is a little bit different tenant, like I said. So we'll sign in. Now, the first time you use this, it will prompt you to say, these are the different services that the user or that the application wants access to. So things like files, the maybe calendar contacts, all those different things we're trying to get access to. But that's only the first time in. So it's actually going to immediately take me back to my app here.
And that's because you've given consent already?
That's right. I granted it access already once. And so it's going to bring me back into the application.
And where is that consent remembered, Rich?
That's remembered inside of Azure Active Directory. So if you go, you should be able to, as a tenant administrator, you can go in here and look under users, or I'm sorry, you can actually look at the apps, and you can see what application your company owns or which one your company uses. So if I go to the applications that my company use, it'll show me a bigger list, and I can go and revoke if I wanted to, or see what users are using what apps. So it's all in here. If I go under users, you'll be able to see all the users that use this travel advisor app. Great. So now I'm signed in, and you can see that through the top here. You can see I'm signed into as RIDIZE at dxdemos.net. But what I'm going to do is click on Org Explorer, and what we should do is hit our breakpoint. So there we go. We've hit our breakpoint. And so now we're going to go and get an access token. So I'm just going to go here and step over this. And if I go and look at this now, what you're going to see is we have an access token. And I'll try to zoom in. You can see it's a little bit of a gibberish, but that's just a base 64 encoded block of JSON data. But that is the key, is if I put that in my header, so if I were to get user details here, I'll go into this. So here's our call to get JSON data, and if I step into it, what you'll see is we're going to go and pass that access token in the header. So here's that access token, and because of that, we should be able to be granted access to the data we need. So we'll go and put a breakpoint here on our response, and there you can go. You can see it was successful, and then I can actually go and return the raw JSON and use it any way that I want. In this case, we cast it back out as user data. So in this case, now I can see that the user is me and my ID is this. And we can let it finish up. I'll go ahead and let it finish playing here. In this case, it's actually going to go and look up my manager, my direct reports, and all of my files. So just a really simple view here that's showing the beauty of this, that it can go to all these different services with a single token.
Yeah, that's great. So you can really see here the transformation of the JSON information you showed us in Demo 1, now live in an application and doing something meaningful.
That's right. And this is really simple. I'll remove all my breakpoints here just so we don't end up stopping on one. But what's cool about this application is it's not that pretty, but it allows us to do some of that traversal. So I can move up and down this. In this case, I'm going to my manager. I can look at her files. I can move up to my boss's boss. And all it's doing is traversing through that unified API. And I'm doing it all with one token. In the past, with the old Office 365 APIs, anytime I wanted to go to a different service, like go to SharePoint, I'd have to get a different token for that. And here it's all with one.
Right. No, yeah, this is great. I mean, you know, now if you want to show it in bubbles with lines connecting everybody, that's just a, you know, that's just a designer activity. The data is here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that looks great.
Cool.
All right. So for folks that are looking at this and saying, hey, you know, I got to learn more, what do you think the next steps are for them?
So obviously, my first recommendation is definitely go out to dev.office.com and get yourself a developer Office 365 tenant. Look at some of the getting started information. We walk you through a lot of the basics on getting started. We also have, I would venture to say, hundreds of code samples that you can go pull down, including exactly what I demonstrated today. It's out on GitHub to where you can pull that down. There's actually a set of unified API getting started labs that cover almost any program language you could ever imagine. So I was obviously building today in C# and ASP.NET MVC, but we have getting started samples for Node.js or AngularJS or PHP, Python, Ruby, really almost any language you would ever want to build in. We have samples that you can go and pull down and look how it's built, apply it, run it against your data, and get off to the races.
All right, it sounds great. Hey, I want to put you on the spot publicly here and just ask you if you would put together a few of those, and then we'll make them available to everyone after the show. Absolutely, would love to do it. All right, sounds great. Okay, anything else everybody should know before we start to wrap?
No, one thing I will say is that we do, in addition to, this is a fantastic webinar series, but we also have a show on Channel 9. This is big for Office, but we actually have our own developer show. It's every Wednesday called, it's the Office Dev Show. Sonia Koptayev from the product marketing for developer experience. She hosts that, and we have a lot of great Getting Started series on there. So that's another great resource you can go look for and check that out on Wednesdays.
Yeah, that's a great show. You guys do a great job with that.
Cool.
Okay, super. Well, listen, Rich, thanks so much for coming and spending an hour with us and helping everybody to understand the unified APIs and showing us how we get that data into real-world applications. We'll look forward to the next time we're together. I think the last time we were together, it was Phoenix. That's what I remember. Was that the last time I saw you?
It was, yeah, out at Dev Intersection. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the next one will be. My next stop is Vegas for IT Dev Connections in a couple of weeks. I'm sure we'll trip over each other sooner rather than later. So again, thanks a lot. Really appreciate you coming out. And again, before we take off, I just want to make sure that I thank Microsoft again for all their support, not just from great folks like Rich, but actually sponsoring the show as well. And again, for everybody, we're recording this, and we'll make the links available to you on the IT Unity site as well. So with that, I think we've used up our hour here. Again, thanks to you, and thanks everybody for coming and spending an hour with us. See you next time.